Welcome to Diversity Conversations, where we engage in thought-provoking dialogue to identify leadership solutions to today's most challenging conflicts. Streamed live each week, Saturday 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Hosted by Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategist and CEOs Eric Ellis and Tommy Lewis. Join us and add your voice to this engaging diversity conversation.
Good morning, Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, the United States, and the world. My name is Eric Ellis. I'm the president and CEO of Integrity Development Corporation, and I'm joined this morning by my good friend and brother,
Tommy Lewis, president and CEO of Make It Plain Consulting. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Tommy. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Eric. We're here in Southwest Ohio, Greater Cincinnati area, and it is chilly. Right?
Yes.
And I'm not talking about Gold Star chili or Skyline chili. I'm talking about the chili that when you walk outside, you feel it in your core. Eric, it is cold this morning.
Absolutely. I think that we need the seasons. And this cold, I think, helps to kill a lot of the viruses and bacteria and germs in the air, I guess. I do like the seasons because we get to layer up and, change up our outfits and things like that. And it causes people to come closer together, when it's cold outside. So I'm excited about the change of the season, but it is absolutely uncomfortably cold. What I don't like, Tommy, is when it's raining and cold. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, because then it's raining, it's cold, it starts to sleet. And then, when you try to get out there in the elements, you have to, commute wherever you're going. Sometimes it gets a little dicey.
I am grateful, though, and I know you are as well, that I don't have the car now that I had when I was growing up. Oh, my goodness, man. The winter, those cars that I had were always going to leave you on the side of the road somewhere, man. And you had to, your heater didn't work well, so you had to open up the windows and all that kind of stuff, man. Woo! I'm glad that I have one that is reliable right now. Grateful for that. How was your week, Tommy?
My week was good, Eric. Had a few ups and downs.
Okay.
And so we had a number of ups. We always have ups, even when it's kind of mediocre. I consider it up. Right. There's always a learning opportunity, et cetera. So we were able to interview with a number of different potential clients. Interviews went well. The team felt good and engaged. They were doing what they thought was best, not only for the interviews, but in their daily job. I always appreciate when our team is excited about what they do and how they provide service to not only one another and me too, but also our clients, customers, and the communities that we serve. That's very important to me. And so that, I take a pulse of folks all the time. What type of music are they listening to in the mornings? If it's praise and worship, right? I respect that that's the space that they're in. If it's a little bit of hip hop, maybe jazz, right? If it's kind of techno music, kind of body moving music, right, that allows me to do what I like to do, and that is I like music too, right? Mm-hmm. I love different types of music, and so everyone around the office and engaging folks, we were all in our own rhythm, right, and path.
Right.
The opportunity missed, Eric, is that I spent about 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks, preparing for a proposal, a request for a proposal. And it was an opportunity in Northeast Ohio that we were very confident that we would at least get an interview, right? And so I was preparing the proposal, taking a look at it maybe once or 1 hour, 2 hours a day. And there was a couple of areas that I needed to flush out. And this was the first time this ever happened, actually, Eric, that yesterday, which was February the 12th, working on the project, I had to go to do some other things, came back and it was around 3:00 and I'm like exhausted for the day.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the proposal, making a couple of tweaks, and then I take a look at the actual request for proposal, the document.
Right.
And, it's right now, I've been sitting there for about 2 hours, so it was a little bit after 5. I look at it, and the due date was Friday, January 12th at 5:00. and it's 5:08. Eric, I'm like, oh my goodness, I missed it. Right. And I was just putting final touches on it.
Right. Just tweaking it.
Yeah. At the last time, as I closed, I was really upset with myself. And I apologized to the team because a couple of people said, hey, did we get that in? Is there anything else you need?
Yeah.
And I was like, my bad. We missed it because of me. I took full accountability. And I wasn't happy about it, Eric. Right. I may have been smiling with folks, we're okay, but I was not happy.
Right.
But as I thought about it rest of the evening, I thought about how God continues to work in my life. There are opportunities that he's given to me that I have not asked for.
That's right.
And then there's opportunities that say, here it is. What are you going to do with it? And I may have stumbled, and fumbled. So I just share that to say the ups and downs of life, the ups and downs of this, that was my week last week.
Well, Tommy, I always appreciate your transparency and your honesty because weeks are like that. My last few weeks have been kind of like that. Honestly, it felt like I was getting this feeling like, am I just getting older now that I don't pop up at 6 a.m, raring to go,
Right.
Because I was just slowing down, getting to the office at 9:30 sometimes, and 10. I mean, that's just never been me. And yesterday, I felt so energized, and I was grateful for that. But Tommy, I do believe that we have to navigate those highs and lows. We have to realize that our future is not dependent solely on us and what we do. Sometimes we just sitting in the chair.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But we're not really running the show. Because when we are, we're getting worse results when we're running the show. And so I know that which is for you, there is nothing on earth that can interfere with that. And with that, Tommy, I like to have us invite to our stage our guest, Chuck Mingo, who is a teaching pastor, I think still at Crossroads, but he's also the CEO of Undivided. Chuck, how are you this morning?
Oh, my goodness. Well, first of all, I am so thankful to be with you two brothers. I have lived in Cincinnati for, over 20 years. And across those years, you both have been just anchors to me, forerunners to me. And so I'm just blessed to be here, really excited to share this moment and opportunity to have this conversation with you and with your listeners. And I got to tell you, I was backstage as you all were just checking in, and I'm literally both taking notes and almost in tears already. Just Tommy, thank you for your transparency in that story. It really, really related. It was very relevant. And then Eric, just your encouragement around, I love what you said. Sometimes we're just sitting in the chair.
Yes,
we aren't running the show. Like, that was a word for me. I needed to hear that this morning. So I am glad to be here.
If you're fortunate and wise, you're not running the show.
I am glad to be here this morning.
Right. Well, we are glad to have you. We're very proud of the work that you are doing. We sat on the sidelines and just watched as God has used you in a powerful way that has made us proud. As we see you, anytime I've ever come to Crossroads, and I've enjoyed, all the different individuals there. I went there one time and I said to myself, well, this is not necessarily for me, but I went to my car and I just thanked God for Crossroads. I really did, because of the great work that the ministry is doing around the country, around the world. And you are a mighty part of that. And for me, symbolize strong integrity in everything that you do, and the preparation that you put into, anytime that you have a word to try to deliver, man, we've been very proud of you.
Thank you so much.
I want to give Chuck a shout out as well. Several months ago, as we all are busy and we're trying to spread the gospel, do the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, just build people and do what God has blessed us to do. He and I ran across each other at the airport.
Yes.
And I will share with you that I travel a lot, like many of us. And sometimes people that we think know us or we know them, they don't always speak.
Right.
This is my story.
Right.
And so I chalk it up. Sometimes people are rushing to the gate and everything, a quick wave. But this brother, Chuck Mingo, he and I caught eyes. I recognized I knew him. He knows me. We know each other. And we come together, embrace, encourage each other, and then move on with our perspective agendas.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to shout out Chuck because, brother, from me to you, I saw that and I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I am passed over by people who I know me all the time. I've been in rooms where people that I've worked with for months, if not years, will look at me like they don't know me. And I feel a certain type of way because I'm not that guy. I may not remember your name, or I may try to connect, where do I know you from? But I'm going to say something like, hey, what's going on, brother? I'm sorry, what's your name? But when it gets to, we've been working together for 3 months, and I'm looking at you like, I know who you are, Tommy, but I'm not going to say anything because of the company that I'm with right now. That is not Chuck Mingo. You, brother, are authentic, right? You are a beacon of light as well. And you are, in my mind, a role model. So I look forward to jumping into this conversation and excited to have our community chime in as well.
Man, thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you so
and
much.
what I'd like to do, Chuck, is really start by having you introduce yourself to our community. And, I'll give you something that Tommy has said to me sometimes. Tommy would be telling a great story, and then he'll say, oh, let me hurry up and wrap it up. And I'm like, Tommy, this ain't somebody else that don't want to hear you, man. I love what you're saying. But so often we're in places that we know if we talk too long, people are looking at their clocks.
That's right. That's right.
You know right out of the gate, man, that we certainly will help to facilitate and manage this. We know we're not going to get every story told, but I do want people to know who Chuck Mingo is, starting from where you were born and raised, and a bit about your parents, and just share with our audience who you are.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. Thank you. And I learned this from a friend of mine. Speaking of diversity, equity, inclusion, I've learned this from a friend of mine, Vince, who is Chinese American, first generation Chinese American, that when you ask a typical person, tell me your story, they tend to start with themselves. But our Asian brothers and sisters actually start generations before. And so I don't always do that, but I've been reflecting on it. I try to do something every Saturday morning with my daughter. We just hang out together. And Tommy, the other thing I related to is I'm also obviously living in Cincinnati, Southwest Ohio. And I come from the old school where they said the hawk is out. Like the hawk is out.
Oh, yeah, right.
This morning, it's so cold. So rather than go to the coffee shop, we did that at home, me and my daughter. But anyway, one of the questions that we were talking about in our discussion was, what is something that was different for your grandparents than for you? And so I want to start my story back actually beyond my grandparents to what I know is probably 3-4 generations removed from me. I had a grandfather who was born as an enslaved African, not born as an enslaved African, but was an enslaved African. And he was the servant, if you will, to his master's son. And my grandmother would tell me the story about how, because he was a slave to the master's son, he would have to go to school with the master's child, which meant that even though he wasn't supposed to be educated, he was being educated. He was being exposed. And at one point, the father, my grandmother tells this story of the father, the owner, the slave master, saying to his son, if you could pick up as quickly as this slave boy what you're learning, you would be in better shape. And I think about that story because we know this is true. We know that there is so much giftedness and talent and intelligence that unfortunately was just completely oppressed and suppressed because of the systemic nature of slavery and the way that worked in our country. But I often think about what was his name was Isaac. What were Isaac's prayers for his next generations? What did he envision that he didn't get to see? but that I get to live into today. And so I want to start my story there because it goes to your point about you're sometimes just sitting in the seat. It could be that the only reason I am where I am is because of Isaac's prayers, because God heard his cry, right? And said, I'm going to do something in the generations to come because of your prayers. And so I grew up in Philadelphia and was really blessed to be born to two parents who loved me and to a broader family of people who were just a unique group of people to grow up with and love Jesus. And so I jokingly tell people I could have literally been born in a church because we were in church all the time.
Right.
We were in church all the time. And as I think about part of my work and life now being a speaker and a communicator, you know, I grew up in a small Black church, it used to be a shoe store. So you're talking like on Easter, maybe we had 75 people in the room. It was not a big church. And what that created were opportunities to be in front of adults speaking. And y'all know this, right? Like, you know, it was like you worked the circuit. So you start with like a little Easter piece. You had to memorize a verse or two on Easter. And you kind of get up and you do your thing. And the beautiful thing about the Black church is you could forget every line and everybody would still give you a standing ovation. So it's like, it was a zero fail. It was a zero fail opportunity. Like you were going to be all right. And so I remember that. And then you graduate to doing the welcome address when you have a guest church come, right? Or you get to do the response. And you know, then you get to do the program for the youth event or whatever. And so I'm so thankful because so much of who I am today and, you know, what God is doing in me really goes back to those roots in Philadelphia of growing up with people who were blue collar people who had struggles but people who had faith and knew how to transfer faith to me. And I'm really grateful for that. One of the unique parts of my story too, is I have an older brother. His name is Harvey. He lives in Pittsburgh now. He was the first in our family to go to college. And I should also say my mom and dad had me really late in life. So there's 13 years between me and my closest sibling. And my brother, Harvey, who I call Skip, is 21 years older than me. So we didn't grow up in the same house. And we jokingly say we really didn't have the same parents, right? Like my parents were in a very different place.
Yeah, they got stopped by the time they got to you.
Exactly. That's what my siblings say, right? But when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I mean, again, you know, Skip lived in Pittsburgh and I didn't see him, but when he would come home for the holidays, when I was 12 or 13 years old, my brother Skip started to write me letters. You know, it's pre-internet, pre-email, didn't have texting. And he would write me these letters regularly. I remember he had heard from my mom. I got cut from the basketball team. I went from a small Christian school to a larger high school and got cut from the basketball team. Couldn't even make JV basketball. I was heartbroken. And Skip wrote me a letter about handling failure. And, you know, later would write me a letter. He was the first one to tell me about the SAT. And when he would come to Philadelphia, he would intentionally take me places and expose me to things that he knew were beyond where I was at the moment, but places where I could go. And so again, as I think about my life, I just have such gratitude because, you know, I went to college in Pittsburgh because I wanted to be closer to my brother. So I knew it was between Carnegie Mellon, Pitt, and Duquesne University because I was going to be in Pittsburgh. And to this day, my brother actually works for Franklin Covey. He's an executive coach, does work all across the world. And he's my coach, and I get to still be coached today by the brother who saw something in me when I was 13 and began to invest in my life. And so that's also part of my story. So Philadelphia is near and dear to my heart. I left Philadelphia obviously for college, and then after college, had an opportunity to work with a company that I know you all know very well, Procter & Gamble. And so spent almost 10 years working at P&G. And I should say this, when I was in college, the greatest gift that God has ever given me happened, which is I met my wife. And so married to my wife, Maria. We've been married for 21 years. It'll be 22 years this June. We have 3 kids. I've got a 15-year-old son, 12-year-old son, and 9-year-old daughter. And so when I left college, I went back to Philadelphia working for Procter & Gamble, but knew that all roads lead to Cincinnati and that at some point I would end up in Cincinnati. And again, it's interesting. Thank you for just giving me the room to reflect a little bit this morning, because this is a different way to tell my story. But another intervention that I have to talk about is how I even got to Procter & Gamble. So Tommy knows this because Tommy used to lead the Inroads affiliate here in Cincinnati. And so I'm an Inroads alum. There's probably some Inroads alum that are listening to this call. So represent Inroads. So thankful for that opportunity. And the way it works in Inroads is, you're in high school. So I was coming out of my senior year. You do your interview with Inroads and, you learn interview skills and resume building skills and leadership skills. And then you get an opportunity to interview with a couple Fortune 500 companies. And if one of them accepts you, you're an official Inroads intern. You get a paid internship. It's a great opportunity, wonderful program. And so it's decision day for me. I had interviewed with 3 companies, one being Procter & Gamble, the other being Conrail, which is a train company that's no longer in business. And the other was a regional gas company in the Philadelphia area. And so I come and, Tommy knows this, you get kind of a guidance counselor, if you will. So I'm talking to my Inroads guidance counselor. They're like, all right, you got 3 choices. They all gave you an offer. So which one are you going to choose? And I'm like, well, I'm going to go with Conrail. And the guy on the other side, he was like, really? And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't have reliable transportation. I can take public transportation to get there. I want to do a good job, et cetera. He's like, you're not going to go to Procter & Gamble? Like, that's a really good opportunity. You got to take a test to be able to even be an Inroads intern for P&G. You're not going to do that? And I'm like, no. Here's why. So this is a phone call. He puts me on hold, and then he comes back, and when he unclicks, I'm on speaker, and it's him, and it's a woman named Dory Ray. Now, Dory was an ex-girlfriend of my other brother. So Dory had known me since I was a little kid.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow.
And Dory gets on this call, and she's like, hey, Chuck. I'm like, hey, Dory, how you doing? She's like, I am doing great, baby. Let me tell you what you're going to do. You're going to take the internship with Procter & Gamble, and you're going to figure out how to get there. And I'm like, okay, I'm working at Procter & Gamble. So when I think about even how did I get to Cincinnati? How did I get to Crossroads? Like, man, God was working ahead of me in things that I just couldn't. I wasn't trying to make a bad decision at 19. Right. I just didn't have all the information. Right.
Wow.
God knew what he wanted.
Were you connected with Bill Blair at P&G?
Oh man, that name does sound familiar.
Bill was running Inroads for a long time. So Tommy was one of my interns. I was the youngest managing director.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so I was the person that got Procter & Gamble to agree to participate with Inroads.
Wow.
And Bill Blair was this wonderful, strong Christian white man that was working with Inroads. And really, I've never seen anybody with more humility and more love of God than Bill. But powerful story, how somebody just jacked you into.
Seriously. Here's what you're going to do. Yes, Dory. Here's what I'm going to do.
And so you now are in Cincinnati with Procter & Gamble, and you're looking for a church home. Talk to us about how you sort of went through that process.
Yes. So, this is 2000. So I moved to Cincinnati in 2000. You know how it is. You kind of do temporary housing. You get yourself situated. You kind of move into your job. And so this is like the fall of 2000. And at the time, there weren't a lot of churches on the internet in 2000. And so I found a couple, one of which was this church, Crossroads Church, meeting in a school, and didn't know anything else about it. But what I did know is that I loved my Black church experience in Philadelphia. And me and my friends, I had a couple college friends who really were just good brothers, Omar and Brian, who helped me stay on the track with God and just all of that. We had found that it was getting harder and harder to get our friends to come to our churches. And we just said, what if we just do something at a coffee shop? And so we started having these gatherings at a coffee shop in Philadelphia, and they were growing. More and more people were open to coming to a more neutral environment to have a conversation that was spiritual.
Wow.
And so when I came to Cincinnati and was looking at churches, and I went to Crossroads, free coffee, casual dress, those were things that were very foreign to my experience of church at that point. And there was just something about it that really resonated. And so I started going back to Crossroads. And they were, again, this time, they wasn't small. There were probably 1,500 people at Crossroads at this time. They were still meeting in the school. They had just purchased a building. But I started to have some reluctance because I was new to Cincinnati. At the time, I wasn't, my now wife and I had broken up for a period of time, and that was a whole God story, but I was single. And I was living in Mason because I was working out of the Mason office across of P&G, which is north of the city. So think 20 minutes north of Cincinnati, a northern suburb. And so I was at Crossroads, and I'm like, if I stay at this church, I don't think I'm gonna know another Black person in Cincinnati. I'm just being honest with you. I'm 20, I'm 24, 25. Right. And so I left Crossroads and started attending a great African-American Baptist church in Cincinnati, and had gotten through the membership process and all the things. And I tell people I've only heard the audible voice of God one time, and I had not at this point in my life. Right. That's happened more recently for me. But I got as close about as I could, and I felt like God said to me, I want you to go back to Crossroads. Right. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know why. But I felt that so strongly that I actually said, hey, all right, I'm going to leave this church, and I'm going to start coming back to Crossroads. And so that's how I got to Crossroads. And for me, all of this was under the context of I'm going to be in Cincinnati for a few years, and then I'm going to move back east. My wife is from Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania. We're not staying in Cincinnati long term. Right. So, great. I'll be at Crossroads. I'll learn some things and, have a good relationship with God and et cetera, et cetera. Well, here we are. That was obviously 24 years ago, and still connected to Crossroads. God would eventually call me out of P&G and into ministry. And that was a big decision. And a decision that I know was rooted in some of the work that God was doing in my own life at Crossroads and wanting to be a part of what God was doing in the church. And so that took me to, I'll move ahead and then we can come back if you want to. Let's pause.
Okay. How did that conversation go with Crossroads? What were they coming to you with? Was it more of them trying to come to you? Was it you thinking that this is something that I need to do? How did that conversation go? And then how did your thinking go around?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It was a 4-year process and a 4-year conversation and dialogue with Crossroads. There were various roles over those 4 years that they would approach me about, hey, do you want to think about coming and doing this role? And I would say every time, for the first several times when I wound up not going and staying at P&G, it was because God was doing some specific work in my own heart. Okay. So the first thing that happened was when I was ready to leave, one of the things that I had not dealt with in my life is a sexual addiction. And I've been very open about that and just what that has meant for my life to be on a journey of recovery around that. God really needed to deal with me. And so that was the first layer of the onion, if you will. Some years later, after kind of, being on a growth journey with that, re-engaging with Crossroads about another opportunity, I had to lay down this idol of ministry. I grew up in a family where it was a family church, right? And in my family, being a pastor actually has a little bit more prestige than even being a doctor and a lawyer. I mean, it's just the nature of my family. And so I do think I had this fantasy about ministry, this fantasy about being a pastor. Whoa, wouldn't it be cool for me to be a pastor at this big church and et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of the things that God taught me through that journey is, and this, I want your listeners to hear this. Everywhere you are is an opportunity for ministry. That's right. Every job you have, every relationship you have, your marriage, your friendships, your parenting, all of it. You sitting on your community council is an opportunity for ministry. Certainly the work of diversity, equity, inclusion. If you're doing that in the context of any organization, anywhere, you are in ministry, my friend. You are in ministry. And so being released of that, I think, is what ultimately led me several years down the road to be able to say, okay, now if I say yes to this opportunity at Crossroads, it's not because this is the be all end all. It really will be an act of obedience. It feels like the next step on the journey that God has for my life. And I'm so glad for the work that he did in my heart that led me to being able to leave with that as the mindset to say, this is less about me leaving corporate to go to this church and work there. And it's more about me leaving the life that I planned and being open to the adventure that God has in mind, which has continued to be a theme in my life.
I mean, that's powerful. And I want to thank you, and then let Tommy jump in here as well. I want to thank you again for that level of transparency. It's never easy to share things that don't always put us in a positive light.
Right.
And yet that for me, sounds authentically how our lives unfold. The problem is that if we are not reflecting upon our lives, then we end up going into spaces that we might not yet be ready for.
Yeah.
And this thing blowing up in front of everybody else.
Absolutely.
But I want to thank you, because as you demonstrate to us that you've had feet of clay, and that you were, and even the whole pride thing around ministry. I think that we can have pride around anything that we do. I see it as one of the huge downfalls of people in general, but especially in ministry. That I've seen so many pastors that have started off and they've been so humble when they were small and only had a few people, and then God starts blessing them and their ministry starts growing. And then they move sometimes from the awesomeness of God to give me this opportunity to the awesomeness of myself. Tommy and I in our field know that you cannot believe the hype. You can't read your own press and believe that somehow you're deserving of all the accolades of man. Matter of fact, it almost makes me uncomfortable. When people start trying to lift me up a little bit too much. I'm saying, don't believe that. And I'll feel compelled to share ways in which I am imperfect. And I'll direct them to my family. If you want to understand.
Right, exactly.
Let's go right to my wife. Like,
yes.
You're a balanced perspective.
That's so true. That's so true. I mean, I'll just say to that too. I think, I'm still on a journey of recovery.
Yeah.
I am still on a journey of healing. And, I've just learned that it sounds counterintuitive, but I believe the safest place for me to be as a leader is in community with people who know my brokenness. I think it's the safest thing.
Yep.
And you know what? There are times when I want to resist it. I'm not perfect at it, but I've told my wife this, I'm in groups and I have men who are mentoring me and all of that. And I tell her, like, hey, I'll tell you this while I'm sober. Be very afraid of all of these relationships leave my life. Like, that is not a good thing for me. It's not a good thing for our family, for our marriage. I have to be willing to be humbled and be in relationships with people who will continue to help me walk through the ways that I'm broken. And I found there's another level of hope and healing that comes when you realize, like, oh, God still uses me even in my imperfections.
So Chuck, as I was listening to your story, and thank you for sharing it, you communicated with me in many different ways, not just the words you were saying, not just the spirit from which it was coming from, but I could see my own story in your story. And one of the things that came up, and I would like you to speak to, as you have made transitions, personal, professional, spiritual, relocated, etc., looking at self, I can imagine that there are times where fear and uncertainty really surfaced, right? And at times it could have been immobilizing.
Yeah.
Chuck, can you talk? And I'm asking you this personally, because I'm going through this, man. There's something going on that I'm excited, but I'm fearful of some things. Yeah. How have you, or what advice, direction, guidance might you provide me and others with? How can we overcome that sometimes overwhelming sensation of fear based on ambiguity, uncertainty, self-doubt? What did you do? What might we do?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tommy. I can totally relate. I tell a story in my book about running across a bridge. And I am so afraid of heights. I wish I wasn't. And I've tried all kinds of things to get over it. But man, like running on the edge of a bridge, like I got a chance to go to the Brooklyn Bridge and I was like, this is the way you should do it. I'm in the middle of the bridge. I feel safe in the middle of the bridge. Yeah. But running on the edge of the bridge is what you have to do on almost every bridge you cross in Cincinnati, except for what we call the Purple People Bridge. It scares me. My heart races and just, man, I know that visceral feeling of fear. And so I also feel that, like you said, in transitions and in uncertainty and in times in life And there's a lot more of them I'm finding in this season of my life where God is calling me to press into areas that are very, very fearful for me. And so when I think about fear, one of the things that I always know to be true, and it's a core belief of mine, is that perfect love drives out fear. And that's a scripture. That's straight from the Bible. But when I unpack that, here's what that means for me. I think that the thing that I'm learning is most important for me when it comes to fear is to love Chuck. Love the fearful Chuck. Don't criticize the fearful Chuck for feeling what he feels. Don't condemn the fearful Chuck for being afraid, because Chuck's story has some stuff in it, just like Tommy's story and Eric's story and everybody's story, that's amplifying why this is a fear response. And to be unaware of that or to be unkind to ourselves related to that is not going to help us get through the fear. And so what does that look like for me? That looks like reflecting on, okay, this is deeper than just this situation. So what's the 8-year-old Chuck wrestling with right now?
Yes, sir.
Right.
What memory and story is the 8-year-old Chuck literally reliving right now that's playing out in the amplified fear? I mean, there's healthy fear. Don't get me wrong. Like, I hope we're all still fearful of putting our hand in a burning fire, because that's not going to end well. But there's that amplified fear, and so I think that's the number one thing for me that I'm learning is I've got to be able to love myself and not try to dismiss the fear. You should be over this by now. You're a grown man, or all the things. There's this critic that I have. I'm just gonna speak for me.
Right.
There's this voice of a critic that, man, if I could kill that thing, my life would be a whole lot better. But that thing ain't going nowhere. I'm still fighting that thing.
You sit right there.
And so I think that's number one for me. But I also think then perfect love means I've got to be willing, and this is where I go back to community, I've got to be willing to share that fear with trusted people who can love me in the midst of that fear, and have a perspective that's not as amplified as my fear response, right? So I think this week I meet with a therapist, and my therapist was helping me think through a situation that I had already had an 11, and he gave me such a simple description of it, totally neutralized,
right?
And it made me realize, oh, that makes all the sense in the world. Well, when you say it like that, I should do this. He's like, yeah, but I get that you're struggling with that. So I think love of self, love of people are what it is. And then I also feel like fear. I think this about a lot of things. This is something I'm saying a lot. I think everything in our life is an opportunity for maturity and spiritual formation. We certainly think going to church is a part of our spiritual formation. And I agree with that. If you're a person of faith, you would say reading your sacred text, whatever that may be for you, is a form of spiritual formation. I agree with that. But guess what? So is wrestling with fear.
Right.
That's an opportunity for spiritual formation. Dealing with insecurity, handling conflict. All of those are opportunities for spiritual formation. And so I just feel like, and I think one of the things I'm learning, how people say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Right.
I think that particularly fear is one of those areas where I guess I'm ready as a student to confront fears in my life, because boy, do they keep appearing.
Right. Well, I'll tell you that, I should have known that this was going to be a setup, that there was no way that you, me, and Tommy Lewis were going to come together, and God was not going to be in the midst of that. Right. With some lessons that are not exactly the lessons that you thought you were going to be addressing.
That's the truth.
I remember that when I first gave my life to God, I was going into churches and I was like, God, look at these hypocrites. That person over there is a hypocrite. And Tommy's heard me say this before, I remember God stopping me right in the midst of that and said, well, hold up, son. Maybe you don't understand that the church is a hospital. And that you're in it. And he went further, Chuck, to say that your eyesight is awfully good for the flaws of others. I need you to be able to turn up your resolution on things that exist in your life. Wow. And so when we think about the term undivided, Tommy and I like that word
Mm-hmm.
because we feel some amount of preparation to be titans, as you talk about in your book, to sort of help get broken people together in that space.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing already is this notion of being undivided from our Lord and Savior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's easier for me to see the dominant culture missing the mark on this,
Yeah.
understanding the consequences of that.
Yes.
It's not as common for me to say, what are the sin areas in my life that are keeping me a bit divided in terms of God's will and perfect purpose for my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we ask the question, why can't they get this together quickly?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then we have to actually turn to ourselves and say, why can't I repair all the things in my life that comfortably divide me from God's will? And I would say to you that it is the reason why we need to be in fellowship with other people, that we can be very transparent around all the things that are happening in our lives. I was going to ask you a question, on the heels of this. We all took a look at the Club Shay Shay and Shannon Sharp and Cat Williams. Oh my goodness. And Tommy and I talked about that last week. That was our whole show.
Did you? Oh, wow. Okay. I'll have to watch that one.
But what we said, there were three things that we identified in that were amazing. Number one was the intellect of both of them. They're brilliant people. And we think about them as just athlete and entertainers, and they just sing and dance and run the ball, But these gentlemen were brilliant. They were well prepared, so they had strong work ethic. And they came with a higher degree of integrity. And I say to people that a lot of folks in heaven are going to look like Cat Williams. In other words, you might not be Cat in heaven. But Cat said that he made most of his decisions based upon what it would take to be a friend of God.
That's right.
And I found that compelling. But one of the things that I saw, and this is the question I'm going to ask you, is the level of transparency that Cat was able to boldly deliver. It's what kept us all on the edge of our seats for almost 3 hours. And my question to you is that level of transparency available in the church? Or are we kind of maintaining that? Is the church the place that we can go to find that? Or are we a bit cocooned, protected, buffered against that level of deep transparency and honesty?
Wow, man, that is a powerful, powerful question. Man, really is. And I want to share a story that I go back to that I think about that just came to mind when you said that. So I'm not the only person in my family who struggled with addiction. And one of my other siblings was part of Narcotics Anonymous. And it was such a significant experience in their lives that I felt like I wanted to be close to them in that and understand more of that. I was the baby of the family. So a lot of that was hidden from me. A lot of the background and why was hidden from me. I saw the addiction, but I didn't know underneath. And so I asked if I could join them at a meeting, and I did. And the meeting was in the basement of a church. And I had never been to NA meeting before. It was my first time. And I don't know, there were maybe 6 people there, and if you've been to a meeting like that, sit in a circle, right? So there's just a level of kind of, we're all here together, and people are sharing their story. And my sibling was sharing their story that night. So I got to hear stuff that I hadn't heard before. And while we were downstairs, the 6 or 7 of us doing that, there was a service going on upstairs. It might have been Bible study or something like that. And I was a teenager. But I left that experience. And as I thought about it that night, I said, I think what I experienced with those 6 or 7 people was closer to God's vision for the church than many things I've experienced on that upper level.
That's right.
And so that's where I go with your question is, here's what I believe. I really believe that the church, the church of Jesus, people who have been rescued, are the best equipped
Right.
to have that level of transparency because we have this thing called grace.
Mhm.
Grace is the distinctive. Grace is the distinctive. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense that somehow the scorecard for me, what I believe, my view of what the scriptures teach, is that the scorecard has really nothing to do with how many good things I've done and how that compares to the bad things I've done. It has everything to do with what one God man did and how his goodness, Jesus' goodness, is transferred to me. And somehow that trumps all of my unrighteousness.
Yes.
It doesn't make any sense, but that's what grace is. So if that's true, if that is how all of us are seen, I think about, Tim Keller is a pastor. He passed away last year, but a great thinker. And he says, if you really understand the story of God, you come to two very clear conclusions. You're more jacked up than you could ever imagine. So the first thing you got to reckon with is like, no, you think you're bad. No, you're actually worse.
Right.
And at the same time, you're more loved than you can possibly believe.
Yes.
And so if that's true of people who identify as followers of Jesus, Christians, church, then we have the goods to do that. I think the challenge, though, is how do we practice that? Are we living that way? Or are we creating a culture that actually fights against people being transparent? And I think that's where you're going with your question, because I would say, sadly, there are many contexts, many church contexts where I wouldn't be safe even sharing what I've shared with you all.
That's right. That's right. You'd be canceled. Well,
I'd be canceled.
Right.
I'd be canceled. And so I do believe it's possible. I think it's something that we should aspire to. And I also believe this. I also believe that the way we get there is not by top-down massive change, but it's literally by what we're doing right now. Right. And being a image of what's possible in smaller contexts and communities where people can say, I like that. I want to be a part of that.
I'm going to ask you one more follow-up question, and I'm going to stand down.
Yes.
Because I also have a related concern around the level of transparency then that we're able to have within our families.
Yes.
In other words, if we go to church and we're not really able to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, well, what happens when we come home?
That's right.
And and I'm going to tell you that that's not easy for me. I didn't see it modeled. I didn't see anything modeled in my family where people showed weaknesses or talked about being sad or hurt or discouraged or depressed. So we talked about being powerful and able to overcome and competition and getting hard work and getting the job done. And I can tell you that all my children are adult children right now, and I love them deeply. But we don't comfortably wander off into real conversations about the deepest things that we are struggling with. And the reason why I'm asking this, because I think that there's a part of the journey, this undivided journey, that says, what does it mean to gain the whole world and to lose your soul? And then what lessons are there in this thing for us that will ultimately make us better ambassadors as we try to. And I just offer, are there any thoughts that you have around it? Because I would tell you that it's always a fine road. So it's not an easy answer for it.
That's exactly right.
You can't just, your kids, you can't tell them too early that there's no Santa Claus. I mean,
Right. That's right. Wait, what do you mean there's no Santa Claus?
They just send you into complete cardiac arrest.
Yes.
There is no Santa Claus. So there's some of this Santa Claus thing that we are navigating within our families. But I would say to you that the most powerful lessons that we need to leave with them are in the space of what are the sin areas that we struggle with.
That's right.
And how do we open up a dialogue in a way that would be useful for them?
That's so good. And I want to go back to what you said. unfortunately, very few of us have seen it modeled. And it's hard to do what you've not seen done. It's just that's just a human principle.
Yeah.
I think about my wife and I often talk about how we were parented versus how we parent our kids. And, I don't know about y'all, but I'm just going to say some of the things my kids say to me.
Oh, you can put out like that camera first time. You put it out back. You and a jug of milk.
but here's what I think is true. Here's what I think is true in that. Actually, some of the things my kids say to me, I should celebrate. That there is a level of comfort.
That's right.
That they could challenge me on some things.
That's no doubt.
That they could question it. That's actually progress. Yes, yes, you had this kids, but there's some progress. There's some things that I wasn't given room to feel certain emotions. Yeah. And that's not good.
No.
And so the fact that my kids can be angry in front of me, at me, whatever, like there's something about that that's good. So I do think we have an opportunity to model something different in our families. And I just would encourage, and again, here's the thing that's also true though. I know this can go two ways. All of us in this call, and probably many of us on the line, have had these corporate experiences. We've been exposed to systems that are different than our family systems. Let's just put it that way. And there's a lot of that actually is really good stuff that translates well if you think about it. Now, I know I've also done the same thing that you guys have probably done, which is tried to corporatize some things in the house that don't work, right?
Right.
My wife ain't trying to have a strategy plan and an action plan. It don't work.
Get up and lead.
Yes, you can do that at work, but that don't work in here. So it's not all. That's right. So it's not all. It doesn't all translate. But what I will say is, I think as we are as a society, and particularly in corporate context, getting more comfortable with words like authenticity and vulnerability and even accountability, that there are some translations of that are worth experimenting with in our home. And I think this is the great thing. Think about it as play. What's it look like to play and experiment with some ways that you want to bring more of that transparent culture into your family? Rather than thinking about like, this is hard, I got to do it. Yes, it may be hard. And yes, you may need to do it. What are some playful ways to do it? There's some opportunities there. Yeah.
Chuck, I love what you just said in the concept of folks are getting more comfortable with words.
Mm-hmm.
I did a training yesterday, and one of the activities was to unpack the power of words. And in this discussion we had, maybe about 60 people, there were certain words that people received to uplift them, and then certain words were triggering words. So a word such as God, capital G, that may be uplifting to someone. Another word, different language for the same entity, Allah, right? Jehovah. We can keep going down. People just started to, oh no, that's not God, or etc. And then we started to unpack the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah. Some folks, diversity, they went straight to the negative. Bad, wrong, against me. Some folks, equity. I'm still on the fence with that. Not certain. I'm going to throw it into the diversity bucket. Others said, well, I'm still trying to figure it out. And so these words that some people are comfortable with, some people are uncomfortable with. What is it about the word? So in the spiritual context, we talk about the word of God. What is it about the word and words that really get into our spirit? So beyond our logical thinking, beyond what is intellectually understandable, but there are certain words that, man, again, it can uplift us to our spirit. It makes us, it empowers us, and then some will almost divide us.
Yeah, that's a powerful insight. And for me, then the difference has to be context and someone's story. You know, like, I mean, I'll pick a word that hopefully is not, controversial. Blue.
Yeah.
Right. If blue is a controversial word in a context, it's because it is a controversial word in a conversation. It's because there's something there. There's a story. There's a context, right?
Yep.
And so I do think that, how can you get curious about someone's story when they're having a reaction to that word, even if it's a positive reaction?
Yeah.
Man, that you said love, and that just resonated with me because I just believe in the power of love. Oh man, tell me why. Tell me more about that. Like, how's that connect to you? That seems to be a source of strength for you. And I think if we can get curious about that, then we can get closer to understanding. Because you all know this when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion conversations. If the goal is to agree on everything, we should just stop.
Right.
Who are we kidding? But if the goal is understanding our differences, and then even in the context of those differences being able to work together, I think there's tremendous opportunity there. And so I think getting curious about, tell me why that word strikes you that way is a really interesting way to get into some of those places where the words are triggering for people.
Let me come here, Chuck, and just pivot a bit towards your book and your life's work. And I'll open it up with this. What is, because you seem to still be, in everything that I've seen you do, very optimistic about the future for race relations. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask you, what is it in this current environment that causes you to be optimistic? The other thing that I'll ask you about is because our expectations are that if you are a Black person in white environments trying to open up conversations about racism and that kind of thing, you're going to have to soft pedal so much on that it's going to be watered down to nothing. And I've not observed your work as being that way. Mm-hmm. And so talk to us about the process. What is your expectations, or what keeps you hopeful around race? Mm-hmm. And then what is it in the Undivided system or process that gives you confidence that we can get to a better place?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I do today. I lead an organization, and our mission is to unite and ignite people for racial healing and justice. And we think the order matters. So we think that the power of coming together is where it has to begin. There has to be shared experiences. And then from that place of coming together, we believe there's tremendous power to then do the work of healing and justice. And we believe that means not just individual or interpersonal healing, but also societal healing. And I can share some stories about some ways that we've even seen that lived out. So when I think about my optimism as it relates to this, I do want to say I like the word hope more than optimism. And here's why. Because my understanding of hope is that hope is not pie in the sky. Hope is not ignorant of the reality. Hope is the belief that despite the challenges, there is a way forward. And so I would say I'm hopeful because I do believe that. I am very, very aware of the challenges. I think this year is going to exacerbate those challenges.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how any of us can come into 2024 and be like, this would be great. This would be cool. What's to be concerned about this year?
Right.
I think
right.
You got right. Right. Really? So I think that because of that, I have to say that the source of my hope, obviously I've talked a lot about my faith, but I also would say the source of my hope is what I see happening in people and in pockets of community. So, there's a series of, in the book, Living Undivided, that me and my co-founder, Troy Jackson, have just put out. We talk about stories of people like Tamika, who was a Black woman who was at a church in Maryland who was doing the Undivided experience. And just to give some context, Undivided is a 7-week, 2-hour-a-week journey where we take people through kind of faith grounding, but also there's history and there's skill set training and sharing stories, and then actually helping people get what I call a sanctified imagination for how to get involved in the work of racial healing and justice. And so Tamika did this at her church. And one of the things that's a part of the Undivided design is we require the group to be diverse, and not just one diverse person, but a variety. And so she was invited to be a part of this at her church. in Maryland, thinking, okay, I obviously have a Black lived experience. I'll be bringing that to the group. And what she would tell you is it was through going through Undivided that she was aware of some of the ways in which she was impacted by the conformity she felt she needed to have and do as a Black woman. She was actually going by the name Tammy and not Tamika because she felt like in the context she was in, she had to do that. Her hairstyles were reflective of what she thought would be accepted. And so she did a powerful thing coming out of Undivided. She actually cut her hair. She cut it short, natural. It looks beautiful. She is beautiful. And she began a journey of healing that she didn't even know she needed. And today she's on our team and is bringing other people into that same experience and speaking at Amazon and other places about who she is. So
just a second on that.
Yes.
So, I love her enlightenment.
Yes.
But there are going to be very real costs associated with that.
That's
in
exactly
other words,
right.
when you cut your hair, there are going to be people in the dominant culture going to say, "Oh my God, what did you do? Why did you? Your hair looked so beautiful when it was straight." And these are the things that my wife and daughter are dealing with every day. So when you get enlightened, does that mean that you then come with the power to then endure the higher level of negative scrutiny that you might experience with that empowered decision?
Well, and here's what I would say. I mean, Tamika's a unique individual, right? So her story is her story, and others have experienced very different things. But what I would say is, and again, this is where the hope is, I think you're able to live into a new reality more when you feel like you're a part of a community that's helping you do that.
Yeah.
And what I would say is what she found was not just an enlightenment experience, but she found a community. And that's what Undivided has become for people. So again, my hope is rooted in people are finding community around this work through Undivided, and it's giving them the fortitude, the creativity, the power to actually be about the work of racial healing and justice. And that starts with their own personal healing, but then also being able to foster and cultivate environments where other people can heal and flourish as well. And so that's where my hope really rests, is that I'm seeing this play out in the lives of individuals. I think about another story coming out of Undivided, which is an amazing one. So Ahmed is a guy who did Undivided. He was a part of the Crossroads community. He went through it and built some deep friendships. And so in 2020, when all of us were impacted by seeing Chauvin, basically choke out George Floyd and take his life, knee on his neck, Ahmed had the courage to have a conversation with the white police chief in his community. And at that conversation, it was clear that that white police chief was really wrestling with what happened in Minneapolis and was open to a conversation. But in addition to the conversation, Ahmed was able to say, I actually have a tool that we could use to have this conversation in the community. And so I'll never forget, right around January of that year, having an Undivided experience, because we do work in corporate spaces too. So we have like a faith-based version. We obviously didn't do our faith-based version with police officers, but 10 or so, 6 or 7 white police officers with Black and brown citizens from a suburb of Cincinnati went on this journey together. And the power of that has been amazing. In fact, later that year, Ahmed was recognized by the police force. They do a banquet, and he got the Citizen of the Year award because he didn't just have a conversation, but he had an ability to bring in a tool that today is continuing to foster deep relationships in those communities. And so that's where my hope comes from. And let me be very clear, that has way little to do with me. I've got an amazing team of people who helped create this content, facilitate this content. We've got people all across the country who are certified to do this work. But I believe there's power in creating an environment where people can increase the transparency, have that psychologically safe environment where they can have a conversation. And then when there's a vehicle to channel those relationships to power, to make change, I think something can happen really special. And so that's what we're excited about, and why we want to get the book out there and tell people about Undivided, because it's a tool that is being effective in helping people do this work.
Tommy?
Yeah, I was going to say the hour has passed us quickly. which we expected. And I will also offer up that this is not the last. Not only not the last that we speak with Pastor Chuck Mingo, but not the last of the conversations that are happening within our communities, respective communities. There are tools, techniques, approaches that would bring us closer together than divide us. And I will close by saying I'm inspired by today's conversation. Not only am I inspired by what Chuck Mingo has shared, but understanding the journey through his story. And we all have our story. So I do appreciate what you said and what we continue to say in our conversations, to be able to share each other's and value each other's stories, right? They're real. Eric?
And then I'll sort of say something, and then Chuck will let you have the last word. And I want you to let people know how they can get in touch with you and how they can get access to your book. But I want to go back to the story that you talked about, the young lady that got enlightened and liberated within her group, and she cut her hair down. And then I came back with a question around what happens in the world. But your point is it's not necessarily what happens in the world. What happened in the group is really the power of that story, that she was connected in a diverse group of people that said that we will accept you as your authentic self. Yes, and I think that's what change happens, Chuck. It doesn't happen at the global level. It's got to happen somewhere. And so the story says that when you put people together and they began to realize that she didn't feel free being her full self, they created something there that allowed her to become her most authentic self. And that is powerful, because that's how change happens. So we really, I mean, man, we feel like we just scratched the surface and we just got started. We didn't get around to all the good stuff yet. Right? But we did accomplish, I believe, Tommy, like every workshop that we've ever done, we've accomplished what was right for us to accomplish this morning. So Chuck will give you the final word, and I'd like you to just share with people how to get in touch with you, and then how to get access to your book.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to connect with people. And the easiest way to do that is go to undivided.us, undivided.us. Everything is there. You can learn more about our work. You can access the book there, and would love for people to do that. And so I would just leave us all with this final word. You know, here we are on the eve, well, not the eve, but the weekend, which we honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I just think about one of his sermons that he gave at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And one line stands out. He says, "I still believe that love is the most durable power in the universe." And I would just leave all of us today with that hope, that love, not hate, not division, not the things that would tear us down, but this idea of a love that is sacrificial and builds us up, is the most durable power in the universe. May that be the most durable power in our lives, in our hearts, in our communities, in our work, in our country, and in our world. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. And community, we want to thank you for again joining us for another one of these dynamic conversations about diversity. And we'll look forward to you joining Tommy and I next week for another powerful conversation around diversity conversations. Thank you very much.
Take care.